Hello, all you freedom-loving people. RFK Jr. recently told executives from top food companies that he wants artificial dyes out of the nation's food supply. And what is President Trump's purpose in creating tariff chaos? Okay, let's get into it. On Wednesday, the U.S. began imposing a 25% tariff on import steel and aluminum worldwide, and Canada immediately announced 25% retaliatory tariffs on U.S. goods worth a total of 29.8 billion Canadian dollars starting on Thursday in response to the U.S. steel and aluminum tariffs. The Canadian tariffs will cover 12.6 billion Canadian dollars worth of steel products, 3 billion Canadian dollars worth of aluminum products, and 14.2 billion Canadian dollars worth of other U.S. goods. The products affected include computers, sports equipment, and cast iron products. The U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick said he plans to meet with Canadian Ontario Premier Doug Ford on Thursday to cool down U.S.-Canada tensions, but he'll wait until Mark Carney is formally inaugurated as the Canadian Prime Minister before engaging in national-level trade talks with the Canadians. The EU also launched retaliatory measures starting on April 1st, which will gradually impose retaliatory tariffs on a total of $28 billion worth of U.S. products. The targets of the EU's tariffs are carefully chosen and are focused on products that are made in President Trump's vote base. The EU plans to impose 50% tariffs on imports of U.S. goods such as Kentucky bourbon whiskey, and on Harley-Davidson and other U.S. motorcycles and speedboats as the first step. Other goods that are facing new and higher tariffs include cranberries, tablecloths, and handkerchiefs. The tariffs on U.S. motorcycles would be a direct hit to Harley Motorcycles, which has a factory in Wisconsin, and bourbon is an abundant product in Kentucky. The second round of tariffs is expected to take effect in mid-April. The initial list includes items such as chewing gum, poultry, white chocolate, soybeans, carpets, and watermelons that are imported from the United States. These retaliatory tariff goods may seem familiar, as some of them come from a list that was created by the European Union in 2018 in response to the first Trump administration's steel and aluminum tariffs, but it was later suspended after an agreement was reached during the Biden administration. But now, some of the tariffs will be reintroduced at higher rates. The EU has been trying to persuade Washington to negotiate over the past few weeks in order to avoid a trade conflict, but those efforts have so far been unsuccessful. The EU indicated on Wednesday that it remains open to negotiations and could withdraw its retaliatory measures if the two sides reach an agreement. If neither side gives in, though, it will not be easy for brewers in the United States. Many consumers are consuming the liquor they've hoarded over the past few years and are now turning to cheaper brands. However, the UK has not joined the EU in retaliating against the US tariffs, but the UK has not ruled out the possibility of imposing tariffs on US goods in the future. Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese described the new tariffs as disappointing. He said that it was an unfriendly act for the U.S. to impose 25% tariffs on steel and aluminum on Australia, which is an ally. But he has no intentions of retaliating because Australia's steel and aluminum exports to the United States accounts for less than 0.2% of its total exports. And Japan, which is an ally of the United States, is equally disappointed. Japan tried to get an exemption without success. The Korean Ministry of Trade held an emergency meeting between government officials and business representatives on Wednesday afternoon to discuss strategies to deal with the tariffs. Senior Korean officials will visit the United States today and tomorrow to discuss tariff issues with their counterparts in Washington. And today, President Trump hosted NATO Secretary Mark Rutte at the White House to negotiate trade and security agreements, among other things. In a post on Truth Social, President Trump said, if European officials do not remove a 50% tariff on whiskey from the United States, then the United States will impose a 200% levy on wines, champagnes, and other alcohol products from France and other EU member states. Then, after the meeting with Rutte, President Trump explained more about the tariffs on Canada.
No, I'm not. Look, we've been ripped off for years, and we're not going to be ripped off anymore. No, I'm not going to bend at all on aluminum or steel or cars. We're not going to bend. We've been ripped off as a country for many, many years. We've been subjected to costs that we shouldn't be subjected to. In the case of Canada, we're spending $200 billion a year to subsidize Canada. I love Canada. I love the people of Canada. I have many friends in Canada. The great one, Wayne Gretzky, the great. Hey, how good is Wayne Gretzky? He's the great one. But we have, I know many people from Canada that are good friends of mine. But, you know, the United States can't subsidize a country for $200 billion a year. We don't need their cars. We don't need their energy. We don't need their lumber. We don't need anything that they give. We do it because we want to be helpful, but it comes a point when you just can't do that. You have to run your own country.
He also talked about Greenland.
What is your vision for the potential annexation of Greenland and getting the potential?
Yeah. Well, I think it'll happen, and I'm just thinking, I didn't give it much thought before, but I'm sitting with a man that could be very instrumental. You know, Mark, we need that for international security, not just security, international. We have a lot of our favorite players, you know, cruising around the coast, and we have to be careful. And we'll be talking to you. It's a very appropriate, really a very appropriate question.
There's an issue in the high north, so the Arctic. So what you did, so when it comes to Greenland, yes or not joining the US, I would leave that outside for me, this discussion, because I don't want to drag NATO in that. But when it comes to the high north and the Arctic, you are totally right. The Chinese are now using these routes. We know that the Russians are rearming. We know we have a lack of icebreakers. So the fact that the outside Russia, there are 7 Arctic countries working together on this under US leadership is very important to make sure that that region, that part of the world stays safe. And we know things are changing there, and we have to be there.
Then the two leaders discussed the war in Ukraine and a range of other global security issues.
Well, we'd like to see a ceasefire from Russia. And we have, you know, not been working in the dark. We've been discussing with Ukraine land and pieces of land that would be kept and lost and all of the other elements of a final agreement. There's a power plant involved, you know, a very big power plant involved. Who's going to get the power plant and who's going to get this and that? And so, you know, it's not an easy process. But phase 1 is the ceasefire. A lot of the individual subjects have been discussed, though. You know, we've been discussing concepts of land because you don't want to waste time with a ceasefire if it's not going to mean anything. So we're saying, look, this is what you can get. This is what you can't get. They discussed NATO and being in NATO, and everybody knows what the answer to that is. They've known that answer for 40 years, in all fairness. So a lot of the details of a final agreement have actually been discussed. Now we're going to see whether or not Russia's there, and if they're not, it'll be a very disappointing moment for the world.
Also today, President Putin expressed appreciation for the U.S.-backed ceasefire in Ukraine, but he also said that a ceasefire would have to deal with the root causes of the conflict before Moscow would agree to halt its invasion. But it's important to note that President Trump's steel tariffs are aimed first and foremost at communist China. For decades, Beijing has been promoting capacity expansion through large-scale state subsidies for industries such as steel, aluminum, and copper. As a result, Chinese companies have been able to sell metal products globally at low prices. This puts producers in other countries at a disadvantage. These countries, in order to absorb the surplus steel, turn to increase exports to the United States, and President Trump has singled out Brazil, Mexico, and Argentina as leaders in this practice. Over the past 2 decades, China's share of global iron and steel production has risen from 23% to 53%. In aluminum, China's share of global production has soared from 8% to 58%. In 2024, China's annual steel production exceeded 1 billion tons for the 5th consecutive year, which is almost 10 times the annual steel demand of the United States. This overcapacity has led to global price imbalances. President Trump has blamed other countries for failing to do enough to curb the CCP steel overcapacity, which has led to more pressure on the U.S. market. A surge in steel exports from the CCP has triggered a boycott by its trading partners. Now, with the new U.S. tariff policy, other countries will be forced to further intensify their trade protection measures. Vietnam and South Korea are the two biggest buyers of steel from the CCP, and they are also major exporters. They have imposed tariffs on hot-rolled steel coils. Hot-rolled steel coils are an important product in the global steel market with a huge volume of international trade. Taiwan has also just announced the launch of an anti-dumping investigation into Chinese steel. And the CCP's subsidy-driven industrial expansion is not limited to steel and aluminum. It also includes strategic industries such as electric vehicles and renewable energy. During his first term, President Trump exempted major steel-producing countries such as South Korea, Australia, and Brazil from tariffs in exchange for those countries exporting no more than a quota of steel to U.S. each year. These measures offset some of the effects of the tariffs. Although the U.S. imports very little steel directly from China, Chinese steel does enter the U.S. on a second-hand basis. Some is purchased by other countries and then sold to the U.S., and some is intentionally mislabeled as to its origin and resold to the U.S. through a variety of channels. So this time, President Trump removed all exemptions from the 2018 steel and aluminum tariffs, and he imposed a flat 25% tariff on all countries. So aluminum tariffs climbed from 10% to 25% as a result. And President Trump's move was aimed at closing the loophole that allows all Chinese steel and aluminum products to enter the U.S. on a second-hand basis. Now, the U.S. imposes a 20% tariff on imports from China, on top of which it imposes 25% tariffs on steel and aluminum, bringing China's total tariffs on steel and aluminum products to 45%. This makes China the only country with steel and aluminum tariffs above 25%. President Trump plans to impose a 25% tariff on all Canadian and Mexican products next month as well. And he is setting the tariff on Canadian energy at 10%. But he has given the other side a 30-day reprieve after negotiations. This shows that there is some room for negotiations between President Trump and his allies. President Trump will likely continue to use the tariffs to force global allies to the negotiating table, forcing them to come to some agreement, such as stopping Chinese steel and aluminum products from entering the U.S. in second-hand ways through those countries. And then President Trump can grant them tariff exemptions or reprieves, just like he has been doing. However, there seems to be no sign of any possible negotiation between the CCP and President Trump. And at present, China's economy is in trouble. In the face of President Trump's tariffs and global siege, it is likely that the CCP will be the one to feel the pain, given the lack of domestic demand and the urgent need for export support. David Solomon, Goldman Sachs chairman and CEO, said on Wednesday that the business community understands what the president is trying to do with tariffs. Solomon told Fox News the business community is always going to want lower tariffs everywhere in the world. At the moment, there is some uncertainty. The market is digesting that. One CEO who attended the Business Roundtable this week said, "Let's slow down and have a little perspective. We may not like how fast this is going and have real concerns, but let's play a long game." The CEO said that amid the current uncertainty, many BRT members are medium-term and long-term optimistic that the Trump policies will encourage capital spending, economic growth, and consumer activity. Solomon stated in the Fox interview, "When there's change, there's uncertainty. It takes a while for people to absorb and adopt. But I continue to be incredibly optimistic about the United States and the direction of travel. We have an incredibly nimble and versatile economy." Solomon added that tariffs are getting the headlines, but CEOs are excited about some of the tailwinds, the move to lower regulation. Regulation has been a significant headwind to growth and investment. While CEOs talk about long-term forecasts, in the short term, uncertainty about President Trump's tariff plan has triggered a sell-off in the U.S. stock market. Analysts predict that on current trends, gold could break through $3,100 an ounce in the coming months. In a note to clients on Wednesday, BNP senior commodity strategist David Wilson said the Trump administration issuing a slew of tariff threats and the realigning of international relationships have added a new layer of macroeconomic and geopolitical uncertainty, providing a significant boost to gold. BNP strategists raised their average 2025 forecast average by 8%, with prices expected to push above $3,100 per ounce during the second quarter of 2025. They also noted that tariff fears have dramatically tightened the physical gold market. David Wilson wrote, "Physical tightness due to the surge in demand for moving gold into the U.S. ahead of tariffs, along with a pickup in central bank buying and an acceleration in physically backed ETF gold demand, have been key year-to-date gold price supportive factors, and we expect this to continue through 2025. However, Wilson forecasts in the second half of 2025, the gold market will price in or normalize Trump-driven trade risks. House Democrats are urging their Senate counterparts to reject the continuing resolution ahead of Friday's deadline. Republicans need Democrats in order to push their bill through the Senate, but the Democrats want a clean 30-day government spending bill. A clean continuing resolution would fund the government at current levels for another 30 days. If Congress fails to pass a continuing resolution, the government will shut down on March 14th. The bill that was passed by the House on March 11th includes a roughly $6 billion increase in defense spending. It also includes a $13 billion reduction in non-defense spending and additional funding for immigration and custom enforcement. But it eliminates funding for veterans who are subject to pit burn and other toxic elements. The bill also includes a provision that would prevent congressional Democrats from bringing up resolutions to block President Trump's 25% tariffs on Canada and Mexico. The bill requires 60 votes in order to avoid a filibuster in the Senate. This means Republicans will need the support of at least 7 Democrats to pass the bill through the Senate floor, but Democrats are divided over supporting it. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer stated that Senate Democrats will not support the bill passed by the House since he is looking for a bipartisan draft of the continuing resolution. Schumer said that our caucus is unified on a clean April 11th continuing resolution that will keep the government open and give Congress time to negotiate bipartisan legislation that can pass. We should vote on that. House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries also urged Senate Democrats to vote for the 30-day continuing resolution over the long-term spending fix. On Wednesday, House Democrats began their 3-day annual policy retreat in Virginia to show unity in their opposition to President Trump's legislative agenda. During the retreat, Senator Goulet said, "I think most voters care more about how this is going to affect their everyday lives. They aren't going to get into the weeds about constraining Trump or anything of that nature if you shut down the government." Senator John Hickenlooper also said, "The president is the person who decides what is essential, and he decides what part of the government stays open, so you're actually giving him even more power. So I haven't made up my mind, but I think the continuing resolution is awful." On the other hand, Senator John Fetterman said he would vote for the funding bill. The House recessed on March 11th and will not return until March 24th. The Senate has until Friday midnight to vote on the House's continuing resolution. Otherwise, they will face a government shutdown on their watch, and the Senate is scheduled to recess next week. Health Secretary Robert Kennedy Jr. recently told executives from top food companies that he wants artificial dyes out of the nation's food supply. On March 10th, Robert Kennedy Jr. stated on X that for far too long, ingredient manufacturers and sponsors have exploited a loophole that has allowed new ingredients and chemicals, often with unknown safety data, to be introduced into the U.S. food supply without notification to the FDA or the public. On the same day, he met with executives from PepsiCo, Tyson Foods, and other companies that sell food and food products. The Consumer Brands Association, which is a trade group representing PepsiCo and other food and consumer goods makers, participated in the meeting. After the meeting, RFK Jr. praised the discussion on X. He wrote that the meeting with CEOs covered food safety and radical transparency to protect the health of all Americans, especially our children. We will strengthen consumer trust by getting toxins out of our food. In an email that was sent after the meeting, the association stated that RFK Jr. wants to work with industry in a collaborative and non-adversarial fashion. RFK Jr. also wants to remove artificial dyes such as FD&C Blue No. 1 from the food supply. RFK warned that if industry does not act, he would take action. This is because he wants to get it done before he leaves office. Kyle Diamontes, who is the acting Deputy Commissioner for Human Foods at the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, informed attendees that he knew the industry could not act alone. He said the FDA would work with companies to reinforce the need for a federal framework to avoid patchwork under state law. The FDA revoked authorization for Red No. 3 back in January, which is one of the dyes in food products. And California also banned artificial dyes from school lunches back in 2024. Several other states have also moved toward legislation that limits dye use. And that's a wrap for this episode. Thank you so much for your support of Front Page. Please remember that every like, comment, and share helps more people to see the truth. If you haven't already, please subscribe. And if you have already subscribed, we thank you, but please double check to make sure that you're still subscribed, because some of our audience have reported that they're somehow unsubscribed without their knowledge. We've also heard that some of you don't get notifications of our videos anymore on YouTube. So when you do subscribe on YouTube, please make sure to tap the notification bell as well. Okay, this is our show for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you like what you heard today, please don't forget to like this video and share it with your friends and family, because everybody deserves to know the truth.